Hi everyone. Um, in this video, I'm going to summarize um, our topic for this week. We are going to focus on the economics of poverty, economic development, and natural resource use. I have provided um, lecture notes on PowerPoint um, on eCampus, and this is a short version of those lecture notes and a research paper that I have uploaded. So you still need to go over the lecture notes, um, not only depend on this video because this is a summary of what we need to cover. And I mean, we in terms of all the objectives of the class, we need to define economics of poverty and looking into this will be a recap or a recall sustainable development and natural resource management. Then the major objective is for us to describe the connections between poverty, environment, and natural resource use, which we can call poverty environment nexus. Um, Maybe we before we move ahead we need to define what is poverty. But when we are talking of poverty, we are saying that condition when a human being is not having the basic needs, um, in terms of maybe clothing, food, shelter, right? This map here, I'm just showing you um, a map of countries suffering from poverty. And we see that in most countries in the developing nations suffer from poverty. They have a lot of poor communities. How do we measure poverty? Right. So the one example of measuring poverty, we can use an index, right? Looking at the number of people who are deemed poor over the total number of population. Um, Basing on the United Nations standard, if you are living with less than $2, $2 a day, you are deemed poor. So you can be counted as a poor person. So we can have statistics uh, based on age, sex, maybe region in terms of the poverty index. We have other index besides the index that I just explained that measures poverty. Um, right, then why should we link poverty and the environment? Right. Usually, the poorest communities are also the most polluted. Um, I know such communities, and I think you might know as well such communities. Later on, we are going to have, I mean, some visual pictures of those communities. Why is it that the poorest communities are also the most uh, polluted? Uh, um, so that only that can give us an indication of the connection between poverty and the environment. The relationship between the social and the environmental sustainability, um, they are intertwined. Why is poverty and environment intertwined? And can we address poverty without addressing issues of the environment? People depend on nature, people depend on natural resources. And so you see, most of the poorest communities, they directly depend on on the natural resources in terms of water, in terms of energy. We are looking at firewood, um, agriculture. They depend much on land, right? Um, so is poverty a burden on the environment? Is poverty a burden on the environment? If you are poor, uh, is it difficult to take care of your environment? Right? So solving the environmental problems without appreciating the concentration, the without appreciating the connection with poverty, may not yield positive results. So we need to understand how poverty and environment are linked. You see, the poor communities shown on this slide, I mean, they depend on the natural resources. I mean, in terms of the water canals, in terms of the environment. So we can talk of land degradation, we can talk of um, um, environmental degradation, yet these communities are poor. So knowing these connections, I mean, uh, it's good for us either to eradicate poverty or to control environmental degradation. And this picture taken from Mali, we see the communities living close to the canal. They depend on water, and the water is polluted. They're doing their laundry. Maybe they bath. Maybe they take that water for household use or gardening. Right? Are they taking care of the natural resource? They depend much on that. They don't have an alternative source of water, because if they they have, they would use that. But with that connection, you would see that, I mean, that the use of the water and polluting the water at end would pose an environmental risk, that's high cost of health, right? So can we address environmental degradation without addressing poverty issues? Because of the strong dependence between, especially the rural population, the poor communities, and environment, we need um, to understand that interconnection, that linkage. So that's why poverty environmental nexus matters for us to know more. And in this video from, this should be Rwanda, you see communities living on a steep slope, um, which means soil erosion is a major issue here, right? And at the end, we are talking of reduction in agricultural productivity, siltation of rivers, then later on affecting the hydroelectricity reservoirs. Right? So at the end, environmental degradation caused by poverty, I mean, can, and I mean, it's at the end, if we have environmental degradation, also will come back. So the cause and effect that I have discussed earlier on, that, I mean, they they can be a vicious cycle where poverty causes environmental degradation, and also environmental degradation causes poverty. Right. Here I just show the indicators of poverty causing environmental issues. Um, um, Destruction of the forest, soil degradation, I highlighted that before, and also fisheries. We talked about that. But can we only discuss, um, can you only link poverty to environmental degradation? It's not always that. Even the richer communities, they cause environmental degradation. They can be the major uh, contributors to environmental degradation, um, because of scale. But uh, if we see in rich communities, um, in developed nations, we are now talking in terms of industries. How much electricity is used, right? The connection, though we may not have a direct connection between those communities and the environment, but in terms of the economic activities, in terms of production and consumption, there's a lot of waste materials coming from consumption activities, more than what we can have from poor communities. So still, even richer communities, they impact the environment. But the difference here is that for poverty and environmental degradation, there is a close dependent, and poverty can be a burden on the environment. But um, So most vulnerable communities are more dependent on natural resources directly. So people depend on nature. So how then can people contribute to nature in terms of protecting their environment? So if they are educated enough to know the value of their environment, so that they can take care of their environment. And in this slide, I have provided a number of discussions questions that I would like you to provide a response. Either you send me an email or either on discussion board on eCampus. What are your thoughts based on this question? So this will be part of your class participation points. So you need to write me an email what you think. Like, do you think poverty necessarily leads to environmental degradation? Just give me your thought on that. And if you go over the slides, I mean, you can get a picture, a good picture on how you can address this, how you can answer this. You need to do that. Remember, you should have the participation points. Thank you, and wish you the best.